مرحبا بكم يا أصدقائي. In today's video, we're going to learn the present tense in Arabic and the verb to go. زمن المضارع ذهب. لنبدأ. However, before we delve into the verbs, I just wanted to draw your attention to the difference between sun letters, الحروف الشمسية, and moon letters, which I mentioned in the previous video. So there are 14 sun letters, and they make the L sound of the definite article L, which means the, silent when you add it to a word that begins with one of these letters. An example is Shams, which means sun. And when you add L to it to make it the sun, the lam becomes silent. So it's not El Shams, it's Ash-Shams. And the lam is silenced because the word Shams begins with the letter Sheen, which is a sun letter. This is actually the origin of these letters being called the sun letters. It's because of the word Shams makes the lam silent. So Ash-Shams. Let's see a few more examples. الثوم الصديق الطريق الطقس النوم اللون الزيت. Now the remaining letters that aren't sun letters are known as moon letters. الحروف القمرية. And with these letters, the lam in the al is pronounced normally. الباب or القمر. Okay, now on to the verbs. الأفعال. Verbs, like all words in Arabic, are comprised of a 3 or a 4 letter root. We need to know these root letters in order to conjugate the verbs, as we're going to add various suffixes and prefixes depending on the pronoun to conjugate the verb. Now, just for a bit of reference, you don't need to know this now, but there are 10 verb forms in Arabic. So a group of 3 letters, can theoretically appear in up to 10 different verb forms, thus changing the meaning of the verb depending on the form. Let's see an example of a root in the different verb forms and how the meaning changes. Again, you don't need to know this now, this is purely for reference. So the root fa'ala, fa'ain lam, in form 1, fa'ala means to do. In form 2, fa'ala means to activate. Notice the shadda shows that it's doubled, so it's actually different to form 1. In form 6, the fa'ala doesn't appear in form 3 or form 4, but in form 6, tafa'ala means to interact. Form 7, infa'ala, to be affected by, also has some other meanings. Form 8, ifta'ala, to concoct or fabricate. So as you can see, they're very different meanings, but they all convey the sense of doing something. So that's how the meaning of a verb or a root changes depending on the form. Now again, you don't need to know this now, it's just purely as an introduction and reference point. Okay, it's important to know that there is no infinitive in Arabic. It's not like in English where we say to do or to go. There's none of that. There's no to in Arabic. Instead, when we want to conjugate a verb, our point of reference is we take the conjugation of the third person singular, the he form of the past form of the verb, as our base for conjugating the verb, as this gives us the root letters and solely the root letters. For example, we want to know how to conjugate the verb to go. We find the verb in the past, which is dhahaba, and we can see here that these are the root letters with which we will work with. So you find the third person singular in the past as your frame reference, and then from there you can conjugate the verb. How do you conjugate the verb? Well, you add suffixes and prefixes depending on the different pronoun to conjugate the verb into the present tense. Now this pattern that we're going to learn is the same for forming any verb in form 1. So once you master this pattern, you'll be able to conjugate any verb in form 1. Alright, let's start. So we have our root here, dhahaba, which is he went, the past. And now we're going to add a mixture of suffixes and prefixes to conjugate it according to the relevant pronoun. So for ana, it's ana adhabu. Now notice, this is not just an alif, this is a hamza on top of an alif. So it's not the sound a, hamza makes the sound It's a guttural stop, and we'll see this in another video. The hamza appears on on top of various letters in various forms, and it's a guttural stop. So it's أنا أذهب. Notice that we've silenced the fatha on top of the dal, and we replaced the fatha with a damma to indicate the case. Now we'll analyze this why afterwards, but just repeat after me. أنا أذهب. I go. أنت تذهب. تذهب. أنت تذهبين. So with the أنت, you have the ta at the start, and we also have to add the إينا. هو يذهب. هي تذهب. Notice the here and the anta are written the same, so you have to use the pronoun to avoid any confusion. Huma, those two guys. يذهبان. Huma, those two girls or women. تذهبان. So it's the different. The ya is for the masculine and the ta is for the feminine. Antuma, when talking to you two, a group of guys or a group of girls. تذهبان. أنتم تذهبون. This is you, group of men. أنتن تذهبن. So notice that the you in the feminine, there's no u, it's just تذهبن. Whereas the masculine is تذهبون. The hum يذهبون. But huna, the female, they, a group of women, يذهبن. So the hum and the antum have the same ending. Una, and the antuna and the huna have the same ending. Habna, habna. Okay, let's see a bit more analysis now. So we have the three root letters in black here, and here, this is I go, by the way, or I am going in the present tense. And this is the prefix that is added for the anna part. It's not part of the root. So we have the hamza, adhabu. So that's the prefix. We have to add a prefix first. Now, there is always a sukun over the first root letter in the present tense, okay? So it's always going to be adh or tadh. So it's going to be no sound over the first root letter in the present tense. There is always a vowel over the second root letter. In this instance, for dhahaba, it's fatha, but it can be dhamma or even kasra, depending on the verb. So you just have to learn which vowel it's going to be. Most of the time it is a fatha, but sometimes it could be a different one. So you have to learn that. That's important when learning to conjugate the verb. And finally, we have a dhamma at the end, indicating the case. This is a verbal nominative sentence. So most of the time, the verbs will end in the dhamma because they're in the nominative. They're a nominative verbal sentence. But they can end in a fatha or sukun. I mean, it's less common, and we'll see why in another video. So just most of the time, they end in a dhamma, as it's a nominative sentence. So the nominative case in a verbal sentence, il-marfu'a. An example of a nominative sentence would be يذهب الرجل إلى المتجر. يذهب الرجل إلى المتجر. Now notice that we actually have the verb at the start, as Arabic is a verb, subject, object language, as opposed to English, which is a subject, verb, object language. So in Arabic, the verb always goes at the start. As I mentioned before, the case ending for the verb in the nominative is dhamma, and usually verbs are in this case and they have this case ending, but there are certain instances when they end in a fatha or a sukun, depending on the case, but we'll see these in another video. So most of the time, a verb ends in a dhamma, but there are certain instances when it doesn't. Let's see some examples. أنا أذهب إلى السوق. أنا أذهب إلى السوق. Now notice that I'm not saying إلى السوق. I'm going إلى السوق. I'm joining the alif maqsura to the lam, because we're in Arabic, when it's possible to join an alif to a lam, we always do. I don't need to pronounce this alif maqsura and then the other alif, so I just join them together. So إلى السوق. هما يذهبان إلى مصر. هما يذهبان إلى مصر. Now إلا means two. إلا. So this is Hamza again, but this time appearing underneath an alif to make the sound I. So إلا means two. نحن نذهب إلى المغرب. نحن نذهب إلى المغرب. Again, I'm joining the alif maqsura to the lam. هن يذهبن إلى القاهرة. هن يذهبن إلى القاهرة. That's all for today. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments. شكرا جزيلا وإلى اللقاء.